On a scorching August morning in 216 BC, more than 80,000 Roman soldiers marched onto a dusty plain in southern Italy, confident they were about to crush an invading army once and for all. Yet by sunset that same day, tens of thousands of them would be dead, and Rome would suffer the single bloodiest defeat in its entire history. A catastrophe so devastating that historians still study it today as the ultimate lesson in how overwhelming numbers can mean nothing against superior strategy. This is the story of the Battle of Cannae, the day a foreign general with a smaller, exhausted, and outnumbered army managed to encircle and annihilate the largest force Rome had ever assembled, and in doing so, changed the course of ancient history forever. To understand how such an unthinkable disaster could happen to the mightiest military power in the ancient Mediterranean, we have to go back several years earlier, to the aftermath of the First Punic War, a brutal conflict fought between Rome and the North African city-state of Carthage over control of Sicily and the Western Mediterranean trade routes. Rome had emerged victorious from that first war, but the peace that followed was fragile, humiliating for Carthage, and financially crushing, and it planted the seeds of resentment that would grow into one of history's most legendary rivalries. Carthage, a wealthy trading empire built on maritime commerce and mercenary armies, had lost Sicily and been forced to pay enormous war reparations, and many within its ruling class, particularly the powerful Barca family, viewed this outcome not as a final defeat, but as an unfinished chapter. It was within this family that a young boy named Hannibal Barca grew up, reportedly swearing an oath to his father, the general Hamilcar Barca, that he would never be a friend to Rome, a story that many historians believe reflects the genuine spirit of generational determination that shaped Carthaginian policy for decades. Hannibal was raised on campaign in Iberia, modern-day Spain, where his family worked to rebuild Carthaginian power, wealth, and military strength far from Roman interference. And by the time he inherited command of Carthaginian forces in Iberia in 221 BC, he was already an experienced, battle-hardened commander in his mid-20s, deeply respected by his soldiers and feared by his enemies. Tensions between Rome and Carthage reignited when Hannibal besieged the city of Saguntum, a settlement allied with Rome, triggering the outbreak of the Second Punic War in 218 BC, a conflict that would ultimately decide whether the Mediterranean world would be shaped by Roman or Carthaginian dominance. What followed next stunned the ancient world and remains one of the most audacious military maneuvers ever recorded, because rather than sailing across the Mediterranean or waiting for Rome to attack, Hannibal made the extraordinary decision to march his army, including war elephants, over the Alps, through brutal winter conditions, hostile mountain tribes, and treacherous terrain, in order to invade Italy directly from the north. The crossing cost him dearly, with a significant portion of his forces lost to exposure, ambushes, and the sheer difficulty of moving thousands of men and animals through mountain passes never intended for large armies. Yet the surviving force that descended into northern Italy achieved something Rome never expected, catching the Republic completely off guard on its own home soil. Early skirmishes and battles at the Trebia River and Lake Trasimene proved just how dangerous Hannibal truly was, as he repeatedly outmaneuvered and outsmarted Roman commanders using terrain, deception, and a deep understanding of psychology, luring Roman forces into ambushes that resulted in devastating losses long before Cannae ever took place. These early defeats sent shockwaves through Rome, and the Senate responded by appointing Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, a leader who adopted a cautious strategy of avoiding direct confrontation, shadowing Hannibal's forces, cutting off supplies, and wearing down the invading army through attrition rather than open battle, a strategy that later gave rise to the term Fabian tactics. While militarily sound, this approach frustrated many in Rome who viewed it as cowardly and humiliating, especially as Hannibal's forces continued to ravage the Italian countryside seemingly unopposed, and public pressure mounted for a more decisive, aggressive response. By 216 BC, Roman patience had run out, and the Senate elected two new consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, tasking them with raising an unprecedented army to finally confront Hannibal head-on and end the crisis once and for all. Historical sources suggest the Roman force assembled for this campaign was extraordinarily large, likely numbering somewhere between 70 and 90,000 men, combining Roman legions with allied Italian troops, making it possibly the largest army Rome had fielded up to that point in its history. A force so massive that many Romans believed sheer numbers alone guaranteed victory. Hannibal, by contrast, commanded a much smaller army, generally estimated between 40 and 50,000 soldiers, a diverse and multicultural force made up of Libyan infantry, Iberian swordsmen, Gallic warriors from northern Italy and Gaul, and Numidian cavalry renowned for their speed and skill, many of whom had marched, fought, and suffered together for years, forging a level of trust, coordination, and battlefield experience that raw Roman recruits simply could not match. The two armies eventually converged near the small town of Canna in the region of Apulia, close to the Aufidus River, a location Hannibal deliberately chose for its open, flat terrain, ideal for cavalry maneuvers, and for its strategic value in threatening Roman grain supplies from the region. Command of the Roman army rotated daily between the two consuls, a peculiar practice under Roman law, and this arrangement proved catastrophic because Paulus favored caution while Varro, ambitious and eager for glory, believed a full frontal assault would crush Hannibal's smaller force once and for all. On the day command fell to Varro, he made the fateful decision to commit to a massive, direct engagement, arranging the Roman infantry in an unusually deep and narrow formation, believing that concentrated numbers and sheer weight of force would smash through Hannibal's center and shatter Carthaginian resistance immediately. What Varro did not fully appreciate was that Hannibal had anticipated this exact strategy and had spent the previous night and morning arranging his own forces with extraordinary precision, setting a trap so subtle and so devastating that it would be studied by military strategists for the next 2,000 years. Hannibal positioned his weaker Gallic and Iberian infantry in a shallow crescent formation at the center of his line, deliberately bowed outward toward the Roman army, while placing his most disciplined and hardened Libyan infantry on the flanks, concealed and ready, and stationing his powerful cavalry, including the feared Numidian horsemen, on both wings. As the battle began, the massive Roman infantry pushed forward with tremendous force against Hannibal's center, and just as planned, the crescent-shaped Carthaginian line began to buckle and fold inward under the pressure, creating the illusion that Roman forces were breaking through and winning a decisive victory. Believing they were on the verge of total triumph, the Romans pressed deeper and deeper into what appeared to be a collapsing enemy center, unaware that they were marching directly into an enormous encirclement, a trap being sprung with terrifying precision on both sides of the battlefield. As the Roman infantry funneled deeper into the collapsing crescent, Hannibal's elite Libyan infantry, previously hidden on the flanks, wheeled inward and attacked the exposed sides of the Roman formation, striking with brutal coordination while the Carthaginian cavalry, having already routed the smaller and less experienced Roman cavalry on the wings, circled completely around the battlefield and slammed into the Roman rear, sealing the encirclement entirely. What followed was one of the most horrifying and complete tactical encirclements in military history, as tens of thousands of Roman soldiers found themselves trapped in an ever-shrinking pocket, unable to maneuver, unable to retreat, and crushed together so tightly that many could not even raise their weapons to fight back, turning the battlefield into a scene of unimaginable chaos and slaughter that lasted for hours. Ancient historians, including Livy and Polybius, whose accounts remain among our primary sources for understanding this battle despite later debates over exact numbers, describe staggering casualties, with estimates suggesting between 50 and 70,000 Roman and Allied soldiers were killed in a single day. A death toll so immense that some modern historians compare it in scale and psychological impact to entire multi-day battles of later centuries. Among the dead was the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, along with a devastating number of Roman senators, magistrates, and members of the aristocratic class who had marched into battle as officers. Meaning, Cannae was not just a military catastrophe, but a near-total decapitation of Rome's political and military leadership in a single afternoon. Historical evidence suggests that news of the defeat sent Rome itself into a state of genuine panic and mourning, unlike anything the city had previously experienced, with some accounts describing public displays of grief so intense that the Senate took the unusual step of banning open lamentation in the streets in order to maintain public order and morale during the crisis. Remarkably, in the immediate aftermath, many within Hannibal's own camp reportedly urged him to march directly on Rome itself while the city lay defenseless and in chaos, believing the war could be ended once and for all with a swift final blow. Yet Hannibal chose not to advance on the capital, a decision that has fueled centuries of historical debate and remains one of the great "what if" questions of ancient military history. Some historians argue Hannibal lacked the siege equipment, manpower, or logistical capacity to successfully besiege and capture a heavily fortified city the size of Rome, while others suggest he hoped the devastating defeat would fracture Rome's alliance system across Italy, causing allied cities to abandon Rome and join Carthage voluntarily, weakening the Republic through political collapse rather than direct conquest. This strategic calculation, whether driven by necessity or by a broader vision of victory through alliance disruption, ultimately proved to be a critical turning point in the war, because although some southern Italian cities did defect to Hannibal's side in the aftermath of Cannae, Rome's core alliance network, particularly among Latin communities, held together with surprising resilience, denying Hannibal the widespread political collapse he may have anticipated. Rather than surrendering or negotiating peace despite the horrifying scale of their losses, the Roman Senate made the extraordinary decision to continue the war, mobilizing new legions, lowering the minimum age and property requirements for military service, and even enlisting slaves into the army in a moment of true existential crisis. Demonstrating a level of resilience and institutional determination that many historians consider just as remarkable as Hannibal's tactical brilliance on the battlefield itself. Rome also returned to a modified version of the earlier Fabian strategy, avoiding further large-scale direct confrontations with Hannibal while instead focusing on cutting off his supply lines, isolating his allies, and slowly reclaiming Italian territory city by city. A patient, grinding strategy that would ultimately span more than a decade before the war reached its conclusion. Meanwhile, Rome opened new fronts against Carthaginian territory in Iberia and eventually North Africa itself, recognizing that the war could not be won through purely defensive measures in Italy alone. And it was this broader strategic vision that eventually placed a young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio, later known as Scipio Africanus, in a position to change the course of the entire conflict. Scipio, who had personally survived the disaster at Cannae as a young officer, studied Hannibal's tactics closely and developed his own military skill in Iberia before eventually leading a Roman invasion of North Africa directly, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal from Italy after more than 15 years of campaigning on foreign soil in order to defend his own homeland. This set the stage for the climactic Battle of Zama in 202 BC, where Scipio, having studied and adapted many of Hannibal's own tactical innovations, finally defeated the legendary Carthaginian general in North Africa, effectively ending the Second Punic War and securing Roman dominance over the Western Mediterranean for generations to come. The long-term consequences of Cannae and the broader Second Punic War extended far beyond the battlefield itself, fundamentally reshaping Roman military organization, political structure, and imperial ambition for centuries afterward. Rome's near-catastrophic losses forced significant reforms in how legions were recruited, trained, and structured, while the trauma of Cannae became deeply embedded in Roman cultural memory, referenced by later Roman writers, politicians, and military strategists as the ultimate cautionary tale of overconfidence and poor command structure. The battle also cemented Hannibal's reputation as one of history's greatest military commanders, and centuries later, military academies, and strategists, including figures studying warfare well into the modern era, would continue analyzing his double envelopment tactic at Cana as a masterclass in battlefield strategy, with elements of his approach echoed in military campaigns thousands of years afterward. Beyond the purely military legacy, the Second Punic War and Rome's ultimate victory over Carthage set the Republic firmly on a path toward Mediterranean dominance, eventually leading to the complete destruction of Carthage decades later in the Third Punic War, and paving the way for Rome's transformation from a regional Italian power into the sprawling empire that would come to dominate the ancient Western world, shaping the political, legal, linguistic, and cultural foundations that would influence European civilization for the next 2,000 years. When we look back at Cana today, it stands not simply as a story of Roman defeat, but as a profound lesson in the dangers of underestimating an opponent, the importance of adaptable leadership, and the extraordinary resilience required to recover from even the most devastating setbacks, themes that continue to resonate far beyond the ancient battlefield and into modern discussions of strategy, leadership, and perseverance in the face of overwhelming adversity. The story of the day Rome's greatest army was shattered ultimately became the story of how a civilization learned from catastrophe, rebuilt itself through sheer determination, and emerged stronger than ever before, a transformation that would echo through the corridors of history for millennia to come. And if you found this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating military disasters compelling, consider liking this video, subscribing for more untold stories from the ancient world, and sharing it with anyone who loves discovering the hidden turning points that shaped the world we live in today.